Welcome back to the Explainer. So, I was digging into some recent agricultural data the other day, and honestly, I noticed a pattern forming that just made me stop in my tracks. We're looking at this incredibly alarming convergence of weather and supply chain crises today. Right now, there's a weather pattern brewing in the Pacific that climate scientists are watching like hawks. And when you combine that with the existing vulnerabilities in our global agricultural supply chain, well, we're looking at a scenario that goes way, way beyond normal market stress.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because there's one specific quote from the climate models we're analyzing that forms the absolute crux of everything today. If El Nino arrives on top of the fertilizer crisis, the global food system breaks. Notice they didn't say stresses, they said breaks. No way around it. We're basing this off some highly concerning models from NOAA and the Australian Bureau of Meteorology. They're showing an increasing probability of El Nino conditions developing in late 2026. And as you'll see, the gravity of these models literally cannot be overstated when we factor in what's already happening with global agriculture.
To unpack how this all plays out, here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at the brewing climate collision, followed by the dangerous geographic overlap. Then, we'll examine the double jeopardy happening on the ground, map out the perfect storm scenario, and finally, focus on how we proactively prepare for 2026. Section 1. A brewing climate collision. We've got to establish the climate wildcard currently threatening late 2026. I want you to keep this question in the back of your mind as we go through this. What happens when a global drought hits an already broken food system? Because right now, the global fertilizer shortage is a massive crisis all on its own. But the climate dimension, that's the wild card. That's what transforms a severe food crisis into a catastrophic one. Uncontrollable weather intersecting with our existing fertilizer vulnerabilities, it's a scenario we absolutely have to understand. Let's define exactly what we're dealing with scientifically. El Nino is essentially a massive rewiring of global weather patterns, and it's triggered by warming in the equatorial Pacific. Fun fact, it actually means the little boy in Spanish, but let me tell you, its impacts are anything but small. It typically brings severe drought to South Asia, Australia, Indonesia, and Southern Africa, while drowning parts of South America in rain. If you're tracking global food production, that list of regions facing drought should instantly set off alarm bells in your head. Moving on to Section 2, the dangerous geographic overlap. Now, what's really interesting about this next bit is, well, it's where the data gets genuinely terrifying.
When you line up the data, a truly chilling alignment emerges. On one side, you have the major countries hit by the Hormuz fertilizer crisis. On the other, the countries historically paralyzed by El Nino droughts. India, Pakistan, Australia, Thailand, Indonesia, Southern Africa. It is the exact same list. The geographic overlap between the fertilizer crisis and the impending drought is nearly 100%. There is literally nowhere to hide.
Section 3. Facing double jeopardy. For these regions, we need to look at the localized impacts and how this cascading failure actually breaks down, crop by crop. So the crucial concept here is double jeopardy. The FAO considers a simultaneous fertilizer shortage and an El Nino drought to be an absolute nightmare scenario. Why? Because you're hitting the crop with less input and less water at the exact same time. Take rice yields in South Asia, for example. Rice requires immense amounts of both water and nitrogen to thrive. If this 2026 forecast holds up, these crops face insufficient nitrogen due to the fertilizer crisis and insufficient rainfall due to El Nino. That doesn't just stress the yield, it fundamentally breaks the entire production cycle. And this double jeopardy, it creates a domino effect of cascading crop impacts across the globe. Australian wheat farmers are already dealing with heavily elevated fertilizer costs, right? Add a yield-crushing drought on top of that, and their output just plummets. Over in Indonesia, a lack of rainfall means palm oil production declines. And palm oil is a massive global commodity, so a decline there tightly squeezes the global cooking oil market even further. Every single isolated drop in production just compounds the overall global shortage. Let's put some hard data to this. -5%. During the last strong El Nino event, which happened back in 2015 and 2016, global cereal production dropped by approximately 5%. Think about that. Just the weather event alone wiped out a 20th of the world's staple grain. Now, let's add this figure to the mix, -5 to -15%. This represents the expected reduction in crop yields globally from the current fertilizer shortage alone. Now, a fertilizer shortage is somewhat manageable over one single season. Yields decline, sure, but they don't totally collapse. But remember, we aren't dealing with these in isolation anymore.
When you combine the historical impact of a strong El Niño with the projected losses from the fertilizer crisis, you get this massive, completely catastrophic number. A projected 10 to 25% decline in staple food production across the most vulnerable regions. I mean, losing a quarter of staple food production in places like South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, that is a system-breaking event.
Section 4. The perfect storm scenario. When numbers hit that level, agricultural experts stop calling it a shortage and start calling it a perfect storm. Let's deconstruct exactly how they classify this.
And this brilliantly illustrates the Food and Agricultural Organization's definition of a perfect storm. It's a convergence of 4 compounding elements. First, you have supply disruption from the fertilizer crisis. Second, you have adverse weather from El Niño. When those 2 hit, countries panic and enact export restrictions, the third element, just to keep food within their own borders. And finally, that artificial scarcity invites intense speculative pressure in the financial markets, driving prices entirely out of reach for vulnerable populations. It's a closed loop of compounding failure.
Section 5. Proactively preparing for 2026. Understanding this closed loop of failure is really only half the battle. The other half is what we actually do about it.
This right here is our core takeaway for today. We can't control the weather, but we can prepare for it. It's true that El Niño forecasts are probabilistic, not deterministic. We don't know with absolute 100% certainty that it will hit in late 2026. But the consequences of this scenario materializing are so incredibly severe that vulnerable nations simply can't afford to sit around and wait and see.
So, how do vulnerable countries proactively prepare? They have to address these specific vulnerabilities right now, immediately, before the 2026-2027 crop year even begins. First up, depleted inputs. Nations must secure alternative fertilizer sources today. They need to be building strategic reserves rather than relying on just-in-time shipping. Second, elevated prices. Governments have to establish financial buffers and subsidies to ensure farmers can actually afford to plant their crops. And third, constrained supply chains. We have to map out logistical alternatives to bypass traditional choke points. Waiting to react when the drought actually hits, it's just not an option. Proactive preparation is literally the only shield we have against this perfect storm. Right now, the global food system is approaching this crucial window entirely exposed. As the source material so powerfully states, that's not a risk to monitor, that's a risk to act on. So I'll leave you with this final thought and question. Are you watching the El Niño forecasts, and how is your region preparing? I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts and local insights down in the comments. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss our next explainer, where we'll be diving into the compounding refugee feeding crisis. Until then, keep learning, stay focused, and I will see you next time.